Hey everybody, thank you for clicking on the Discover God YouTube page. My name is George. Today we're going to be talking about video game addiction. Check it out. Hey guys, thank you for clicking on the video. Today's topic is going to be video game addiction. What we should say just straight from the gate is that video games have the potential to be addicting, but that should not be the controlling narrative for video games, and it shouldn't be a fear that we live with when we approach video games. What we're gonna do in this video is actually look at the criteria for video game addiction according to the Harvard Medical School as well as the World Health Organization, and we're gonna compare that to a Christian perspective. Okay. So let's start by looking at Harvard Medical School's criteria for video game addiction. They also call it internet gaming disorder. So the way that Harvard Medical School approached this, they have 9 characteristics. And they say that if you have 5 of the 9 within a 12-month period, that you should consider yourself addicted and that you should contact Computer Gaming Addicts Anonymous. So these 9 characteristics are gaming preoccupation, withdrawal, tolerance, loss of interest in other activities, downplaying use, loss of relationship, educational, or career opportunities, gaming to escape or relieve anxiety, guilt, or other negative mood states, failure to control, and continued gaming despite psychosocial problems. They also say that gaming addiction is associated with sleep deprivation, insomnia, depression, aggression, and anxiety. One thing that I would agree with that I think is a common, that's been established already, is that an overexposure to violence, and this is in any media form, right? Not just video games, but an overexposure to violence can actually lead, it desensitizes you to violence and can lead to physical acts of violence. So if you watch too many crazy things, you might end up doing those things in real life. And that's something you really got to be careful of. But that's what the Harvard Medical School has to say about video game addiction. Let's look at what the World Health Organization says. So at the front of their page, they say that this affects only a small portion of people who play video games. But then they actually have a reference to a research paper from Japan where they say that nationwide, in 2011, Japan had 48 centers for video game rehabilitation. And so they kind of contradict themselves right off the gate, which is interesting. But they say that you should take into consideration the amount of time that you spend gaming, especially when it comes to the exclusion of other daily activities or changes in your physical or psychological health and social functioning. So there's some similarities in that, right? I think that as Christians, we have to take the scientific research into consideration. But I think that obviously they don't take everything into consideration when it comes to Christian faith or religious practice. And I think that we have to help each other out in figuring out when any activity has gone too far. In this case, video gaming, has it become something addicting? And so for me, Paul, the Apostle Paul in Romans, he clearly says that the result of Jesus' death and resurrection is that we are now justified and have a right standing with God. And it is through this belief in Christ that we can have, that we can live Jesus-like lives. And that means that we can have the correct relationship with God, with our neighbors, and with creation. And actually, Paul talks about the relationship with God and our neighbors in Romans 5 and 13. And he talks about our relationship with creation in Romans 8. I believe that in order to live a good Christian life, to live a healthy Christian life, we have to hold on to, nurture, and cultivate these 3 relationships. And so when we start to apply video gaming and our video game habits into this criteria, you look at it like this. when you start to take into consideration your relationship with God and video games, you have to have a healthy prayer life. You have to be worshiping God. You have to be able to actually feel God's presence in your life. And if you feel that your video game habits have dwindled any of those things in any way, it's time to put the controller down. When it comes to our relationship with our neighbors, I think that means like literally like your family and your relatives, but also the people around you. And I think that it also includes church, right? Church could probably go into the first category as well. But do you have healthy social relationships? And that to me, that doesn't only mean physically, because, you know, we can have deep, meaningful relationships with people online as well. And the third one about creation, to me, that means, are you taking your ecological footprint into consideration, right? Like your carbon emissions and your recycling and your use of single-use plastic. Can we start to, you know, look at the doctrine of dominion over the earth? And so for me, those three things have to be intact, in place, and thriving in order for human flourishing to happen. And it's not just video games that can have an effect on it. It could be anything. But in this case, if your video game behavior, your video game habits have an effect on those things, you really need to do an internal inventory and just see if you've taken that habit a bit too far. And if you have, then it's time to put the controller down. And so I think that we can see that there is overlap between what Harvard, the World Health Organization, and what a Christian perspective says, right? You have to take your physical well-being into consideration, and you have to take your social relationships into consideration. The difference obviously is our relationship with God, as well as creation, that we have to take into consideration as well. One thing I will disagree with Harvard Medical School is their characteristic of playing video games to relieve or they say escape anxiety, guilt, or other negative mood states. I don't agree with that. I recently spoke to media psychologist Courtney Garcia, and she actually advises, and she is a practitioner of using video games as a form to relieve stress and anxiety, and to, you know, change your mood or boost your mood. And she actually considers it an important aspect to use to live a well-balanced life. I find it really, really interesting. She has a really cool YouTube channel where she does really good analysis of video games. Her channel is Screen Therapy. I'll put the link in the description. Check it out. So the World Health Organization is the first body that began to use the word addiction and applied it to video games. And the reason why is because of the chemical dopamine that gets released into your brain in a similar way than when you use drugs. What happens when you play video games is that your brain gets stimulated visually through the gameplay to release the chemical dopamine. Look at a game like Fortnite. You're jumping, shooting, building, and it's an overstimulation. And so you are constantly stimulated and triggered to release the chemical dopamine, which is why people continue to play and play and play. Other games have a similar effect. Some of those companies are profit driven. And so we have to ask the question, are these mechanisms actually put in place on purpose so that people continue to play again? A lot of these games are really high in replay value. And so we have to question the intention of some video game companies in the industry. Not all games are made like that. Not all people suffer from video game addiction, but it's something that we should be aware of. Because research doesn't tell us that there is a threshold, I think that we each as individuals have to be responsible for our gaming habits. We have to ask ourselves those three questions about those three relationships. How is my relationship with God? How is my relationship with others, my neighbors? And how is my relationship with creation? We have to do that internal inventory. And I think that that is how we determine if we've done anything too far, in this case, video game addiction. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching the video. I look forward to checking you guys out on the next one. Bye.